Hello, I'm Steve Caton. I'm part of the leadership team at Generis, and I'm excited to be here with Jessica Bealer. We are going to be talking about your latest ebook, which is all about recruiting and retaining high-level volunteers, which is a very passionate topic for me, having been a volunteer in church and also an elder who's tried to figure out how to solve this volunteer conundrum. Really excited about the book and what you have to say about it. So why don't we start with just the why? What motivated you to write it?
Well, I think the motivation is it's what I get asked about most, right? You know, like most of the time when I get on a call, talking about family ministry in general, there are one of two questions: how do I engage parents more, or how do I get more volunteers? And that's honestly the question that I hear more often. And I also think that, I've worked with hundreds of churches at this point: big churches, small churches, churches with big budgets, churches with small budgets or no budgets whatsoever, churches that have very little diversity within their congregation, and churches that are like a melting pot within their congregation. And yet there is one kind of like equalizing factor, and that is volunteers. Because if you don't have enough human resources, you can't mobilize your ministry. And so it's super important that we actually learn how to recruit people and how to keep them once we have recruited them. And so that was the premise of the book, and I was just like, let's give some really practical information and some just ideas, some kind of like thought stirrers, And so you can begin to think about, are we actually creating a contagious volunteer experience where people, it makes it hard for them to walk away? Are we attractive? Are we drawing people to us? That type of thing was what the book was designed to do.
I love that. I love the phrase contagious volunteer experience. I've never experienced that, but I love the thought. So looking forward to seeing what you have to say about that. One of the things you talk about early in the book is this concept of ministry attractiveness and how that impacts volunteer recruitment. Can you unpack that a little bit?
The thing is, like, no one wants to be on a ship that's sinking. Right? Like, everybody wants to be a part of a winning team. Everybody jumps ship when it's going down, And so if your ministry is not attractive, if it's not actually drawing people to it, you're going to have a hard time recruiting people. It's like, hey, do you want to come into this classroom that has way too many kids and it smells funny and there's not enough lighting? Do you want to come do that? It's going to be great, And people are going to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they may be polite about it. I don't know, this is not the right season,
So many things, like experiences coming to mind for me right now.
I know. But it really does, you have to look at your ministry and you have to ask yourself, are we creating a ministry that's attractive? Like, does it look nice? Does it smell nice? Are there friendly faces? Does it have a warm, fun feeling about it? It should be fun to volunteer. It shouldn't feel like a burden. So, is your ministry attractive? I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing you talk about, again, staying with this theme of recruiting, is knowing what and who you need. What do you mean by that?
And so a lot of times people will say, man, I need more volunteers. And specifically, I'm talking about staff here. Staff or high-level volunteers, like volunteer leaders. That would be, what do you need? What can I help you with? Maybe you have like an assimilation program or process or whatever, and there's somebody that's overseeing that. And maybe your staff or your campus pastor, maybe your senior pastor says, what do you need? And you're like, I just need more volunteers.
Just bodies, right?
Right. What does that mean? It's so ambiguous. Like, I don't know what that actually means. Like, do you need like 45-year-old men, or do you need like teenagers? Like, what do you need? And a lot of times what ends up happening is if we can't verbalize our need, then it never gets met, and no one can actually come alongside us and help us. So it's so much better when someone says, what do you need, for you to say, I'm really lacking in male leadership in my elementary. I need 2 or 3 males who could step in and lead small groups for young guys, for young boys.
Yeah, that's great.
And I also need two people in my baby room. So when you say I need 5 people, that's much more manageable. I can help you find 5 people versus I just need a lot of people in my ministry.
Yeah, it goes to the clarity thing, right?
Exactly.
As the more clarity you're able to give about what you're looking for, then the more people can say, I'm the right fit, or I know someone who is. I think we are tempted to just put the message out of, I need anybody and everybody, but then no one responds to that, or very few people.
Right. And you don't want anybody and everybody.
That's
like, you want the people who are called, to your ministry.
Yeah. So, here at Generis, we love data. We got church analytics and all that going on. So we love data. We utilize data in the generosity conversation all the time. Talk about how data shows up for you in this conversation.
Right. So one of the things that is key about children's ministry and student ministry, which is family ministry, is that they have to check in every single week. So we have all of their attendance patterns. We don't have that across any other, unless you all are checking in every single person that walks through the door, which is probably not the case. You really don't have that level of data. And so the children's ministry check-in data is actually used in generosity campaigns quite often because you can actually see if a family is attending on a regular basis. But the other thing, if you get really, really good at your data, about using your data, you can actually look back to it and see how they're engaging with your church. And so if a parent, for example, has a propensity to engage with your church, they probably have a propensity to serve as well. So, for example, let me give you an example. So say someone signed their child up for baptism, so a child baptism service. They came, they watched their child be baptized. It was a milestone moment for their family. They're really, really excited. They went beyond regular attending. It was beyond their just regular Sunday or Saturday night attendance. They went beyond that. They said, we want to be involved in this special event. So now we're doing that. So there's a propensity there. Why not give them a call the next time that you're having a baptismal service and say, hey, we're doing that again for other families. Would you like to be involved with that? They're already showing a pattern of, hey, I'm really getting plugged into this church. I'm really enjoying my family. It's making an impact on my family. Maybe those are the people that we should actually call and say, hey, do you want to plug in with our ministry? So you can use the data and you can actually look at your database to see who is more likely to say yes when you ask.
And you're inviting people to take the next step based on what you know, not what you're guessing.
Exactly.
So in that conversation, do you find that people or church leaders are hesitant to do the next invitation, or is it just they don't have the data?
Well, I think that they just don't look at the data.
Okay.
Most of them have the data.
They have the data.
They just don't actually take the time to go in and look at it. And I do think that strategy isn't one that might just pop into their brain. They're like, oh, I should probably invite parents who have baptized their child in the past to participate in this new. That's just not something that's like, that may be, evident to them. But I do think that there's a lot of ways that we can use our. Data is gold, and data can drive the growth of our ministry, but we don't utilize it.
Yeah, I love that you're addressing that in this book. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so Jess, we've been talking about recruiting, which is obviously super important.
Right.
But then once you've recruited them, you better retain them.
Right. You got to keep them around.
You got to keep them around. Right. So let's transition to that and your thoughts on retaining.
Yeah. So, I told you I get asked the question most often, like, how do I get, more volunteers? And I always say, well, keep the ones you have. And people are like, okay, that's good. But how do I get more volunteers? But here's what I've learned is that a volunteer who sticks with you for a long time, they buy into your ministry. They become an owner to the point that they walk around and talk about your ministry to neighbors, to coworkers, to friends, to family. They become your best recruiters.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're literally walking billboards for your ministry everywhere they go because it's a part of who they are. Like their identity is wrapped up into their service and their calling. And so I feel like that if we would just actually focus a little bit more on retainment and actually creating a great volunteer experience, we wouldn't actually have to recruit as often. And I'll tell you, I have a church right now that has proven it. I'm working with a church in Seattle, and they didn't have a volunteer assimilation at all. So there was no recruitment plan. They didn't talk about it from the main stage. It was nothing. And when I first started working with them, they were like, well, how are we going to get more people if we can't even invite people from the stage? And I said, let's just focus on creating a great volunteer experience. Let's just make it so that it's so much fun that everybody's talking about it. And here we are 9 months later, and they went from 22 volunteers, which was not nearly enough because they're a very large church. They went from 22 to now they're over 100 in less than a year. So it's like 500% growth, and they just now started assimilating, like an assimilation process.
Wow.
So we still weren't announcing it. What was happening is that people were beginning to enjoy their experience.
That's great. So is it about the volunteer experience and making sure that that's amazing, or is it about loving on the volunteers?
All of the above.
All the above?
Yeah. It's D, all of the above.
Okay.
And I talk about this a little bit in the book, creating this contagious volunteer experience.
Yeah.
It is about clarity, making sure that they understand the vision, and it is about equipping them and making sure that they have everything they need to do the job that you've called them to do or that you've asked them to do. It is about empowerment, like letting them own some things and knowing that they're going to make mistakes and being okay with that. And then it is about appreciation. There's also a really important part about accountability as well. Like I think a lot of times we avoid accountability because we feel like that, it's conflict and that's negative. But what actually happens is when somebody doesn't show up and then you don't want to make them feel bad and so you don't call them, what they translate that is they don't care and my role doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
And really, I mean, you're not calling them to say, hey, why weren't you there? You're calling to say, hey, what's going on?
Yep.
Like, because, you matter to us.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
so, it's all of those things. I mean, creating a contagious volunteer experience is essentially creating such a unifying culture that it feels like family.
Yeah.
And it would be impossible to walk away from it.
God, I love that, man. I wish I had experienced that at some point in time. It sounds amazing.
I will tell you, I mean, I have been a part of a contagious volunteer experience, and it is one of those things where on Sunday morning you may be tired, you may want to go home and take a nap because you're so tired, but you walk away with a smile on your face, and you can't wait to get back the next week.
Oh yeah, I mean, just as you describe it, I want to lean into that.
Right.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So another thing you talked about in the book was this layering your leadership.
Yes.
And so what does that mean? Layering your leadership. What does an org chart look like with layered leadership? Explain that concept.
Right. So everybody needs someone that is their advocate. Everyone needs someone that they can talk to. Everyone needs someone that they can voice their opinions to, and someone to hold them accountable. And a lot of times right now, specifically in the realm of family ministry, there is one person at the top of the org chart, and they are over all of the care, accountability, appreciation, scheduling, everything over all of the children's ministry, all of the student ministry, or in some cases, all of both. They're the family ministry pastor, and every volunteer reports to them. The problem is that there's no way to adequately complete your job function every single week and care for all of those volunteers.
Yeah, no way.
And so you're going to have to layer your leadership. And so I'm essentially talking about identifying people who show some potential to lead and putting them into positions to lead and empowering them to handle problems as they arise.
Yeah, that's great.
For me, empowerment is granting the authority to make key decisions at critical moments. You can't be the only person to do that.
Yeah.
It has to be somebody else beyond you.
Is the layering something that can happen over time as you are growing the base of volunteers?
Yes.
You can just let that begin to sort of show up organically, or do you need to be thinking about that from the get-go?
So both.
Okay.
I feel like that if you're a smaller church, then I feel like you probably may only need one layer of leadership.
Okay.
As you grow, you're going to need multiple layers, two or maybe even three layers of leadership. And so, I think it is something that can happen organically, but from the very first day, if you were a church plant from the very first day, or you're a newbie to your ministry, you were just hired, your very first day, you need to be identifying people who show potential to lead.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the contagious volunteer experience. How about this connect the dots section?
Yes.
And what does that mean? What's that about?
Yeah, so a lot of times people lose sight that what they're doing is actually bringing about life change. So they may be changing a diaper, or they may be struggling with a third grade small group boys, and third grade small group boys are small groups are a little rough, Lots of energy and discipline is lacking at that age, And so it can be tough. And so a lot of times when you are in the trenches of ministry, you can kind of forget why you're doing this, and you begin to think like, does what I'm doing actually matter? I mean, I'm just wrangling these third grade boys does this actually matter? And so when I say connect the dots, I'm actually saying find ways to actually draw the life change that is occurring both within your ministry and within the church, the adult ministry as well. Draw that, connect the dots to what they're doing. I'll give you an example, and this is not in the book, so this is just bonus material.
Great.
So I had a campus kids director, and they had been a non-permanent campus for too long. It had been a long time since they had opened that campus. I mean, we're talking like 5 years as a non-permanent. It was a long
Set
time.
up and tear down and all that.
The whole deal.
5
Yeah,
years.
for 5 years. It was a long time. So her ministry teams were feeling a little worn. They were a little tired of setting up.
Imagine.
And because where they were located at the school, they were like 3 wings away from the auditorium. It was just but the space that made sense that we could use and what the school would allow us to use, which a lot of times you're at the mercy of the facilities that you've been blessed with. And so they were so far away that they weren't seeing the life change that was happening. They may have some conversations with parents, but again, parents are like, by the time they get over there, they're just rushing, like, give me my kid, let me get out of here, or let me drop him off because now I've got to walk, half a mile to get back to the service. And so they weren't really like feeling like, man, we're a part of something great. And so she came to me and she's like, what can we do? We brainstormed for a couple weeks, and she came back and she had this idea that we then tweaked a little bit. And this is what we started doing. On Monday morning, we started running reports of all of the decisions that had been made over the course of that weekend. So anyone who had signed up for counseling, anyone who had said the prayer to receive Christ, anyone who had rededicated their life to God, I mean, anything, any decision that they had made, we ran a report. We then cross-referenced that with all of the children in our ministry. And we started contacting volunteers on Monday. We spent about 2 hours every Monday. We would say, hey, I just want you to let you know that because you were serving in the toddler room, Emily's mom gave her life to Jesus.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we were connecting the dots of what was actually happening in the church to their service role. And so that's so important. Again, it goes back to creating this contagious volunteer experience, but we have to intentionally connect the dots for them.
I love that. It's connecting to the dots to the ministry, the impact, and the clarity of the vision that the church is called to in the first place. It all flows together, right?
Yes.
And the more you can see, help people see what their role is in the story, then the more they're going to lean in and be committed to the story.
Exactly. And the more motivated they get.
Yeah,
they're like,
totally.
Man, they get a little taste of life change, and you're like, oh, I want to be a part of that again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Jess, there's so much that we didn't touch on. I think these are amazing points that we covered, but so much more in the ebook. So you've got to go check out this ebook. If you're a leader and you're trying to figure out how to manage this lifeblood of your church,
for
which
sure.
is volunteers. I know it's a difficult conversation sometimes, and it's confusing, and I think the retention piece is always the one that I hear leaders talk about, that even the ones that do a good job of recruiting, it's that retaining piece that gets to be such a challenge. So anyways, great stuff, Jess.
Thank you.
I'm super excited that you took the time to share what you've learned over years of doing this with so many different kinds of churches. So thanks for doing that.
Thanks for sitting down with me today. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's great. So be sure to go download this resource. You can find it on generis.com. And thanks again, Jess. It's fun.